I wanted to talk a little bit about good versus evil stories. I know there is a lot of rhetoric out there that says that fantasy should not encourage the kind of story where one side is perfectly good and the other side is perfectly bad. T- absolutely bad. And there should be nuance. There should not be evil races and good races because that encourages racism. And I think there is a lot of merit in this argument because the real world is not that way. The real world is not a place where monocultures exist, where a culture which is absolutely wrong in every way exists, a culture that only wants to destroy and kill and murder and corrupt exists. There is good in every place and there is bad in every place, which is why something like Game of Thrones is often pitted against something like Lord of the Rings. Game of Thrones has grey characters, a lot of grey characters, characters which have terrible motivations, but maybe they're good people, maybe they're bad people who occasionally do good things, and there are innocent people who suffer a lot and never get any justice, and there are absolutely terrible people who don't suffer at all despite being really terrible. And that's, I think, a fair representation of the real world. But my question is this, and allow me to be a contrarian here. I think that the real world that we live in today is somewhat more complicated, and therefore it kind of necessitates a simpler kind of story. Allow me to explain. Black and white narratives can be problematic, but I think we sometimes lose sight of the kind of problems that arise out of an overabundance of grey. Sometimes the real world is not grey, sometimes the real world is black and white. And sometimes people who insist on treating things as grey, even when there is no grey there, become a source of problems. Take racism, for example. It's bad and terrible. But you will find people who say both sides have a point of view that is problematic. And that is just not true. Because the people who say that there is a middle ground between racism and not racism are actually not on the side of good at all. People who are in favor of committing genocide, for example, people who are in favor of murdering people because of their religious identity. You can't have a middle ground between that position and the position that says, no, you're wrong. It's like a burning house, and there is a need to put the fire out because there are innocent people trapped inside that house. And someone is saying, let's find a middle ground. Let's allow half the people to die in that burning house and put out half the fire. That's a nice compromise, isn't it? My point is that when we are writing stories about good and evil, we should not probably think that a pure good versus pure evil story is always a bad idea. Tolkien, for example, was writing Lord of the Rings at the time of the World War. And from his perspective, the definition of good and evil was very clear. It was very clear that something was being destroyed that should not be destroyed, and the people who were doing the destroying were evil. Again, I understand the need for gray, I understand the need for nuance, but I think we lose a huge part of the plot when we think that everything has to be nuanced. Some things are actually not nuanced at all. The choice is very black and white. There is no moral gray. It is always good versus evil. It is always right versus wrong. And I think there is scope in fiction of pursuing such stories. So, if you are a writer who's writing a story about good versus evil, where there is absolute good and absolute evil, absolute life and absolute death, I don't think you should hesitate to do that simply because people say that good versus evil is simplistic. Sure, it may be simplistic, but that is only because life sometimes is that simple. There are different ways of doing this, of course. Your good versus evil story does not have to be about different races, it does not have to be different peoples, where one group is good and one group is evil. It can simply take the shape of moral choices. For example, you can have a diverse cast where some people from this race or group are good and some are evil, and some people from that side are good and some are evil. But when the choices arise, don't feel obligated to show nuance in every single place. What I mean to say is that killing innocent people should always be shown as a bad thing. There is no nuance there. I don't know about you, but even as a reader, I'm a huge fan of stories where moral stakes are clearly defined and the people who make the right choice are shown to be good and the people who make the wrong choice are shown to be bad, or at the very least, ill informed. So, to summarize, I think it is okay to not have nuance as a guiding principle for every single decision in your story. It is okay to, at least in some places, build a good versus evil narrative because truly evil things do exist and truly good things also exist. I think that helping people, protecting people, standing up against oppression is good. And I think racism, discrimination, genocide, and cruelty are always bad. And there is nothing wrong with saying so. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.